Well, a shipload of Australian sheep caught up by those Houthi missile strikes creating all the dangers in the Red Sea at the moment has returned to waters off Fremantle today. The immediate fate of the sheep on board, though, is entirely unclear, but the live sheep export trade in general is close to being wound up anyway by the Albanese government. We're still awaiting a date for that. This would represent the fulfilment of a long-sought closure of the industry for Labor MP Josh Wilson. He joined us from his electorate in the West. Well, Josh Wilson, I understand it's a pretty warm day there in Fremantle, which is only exacerbating problems, I imagine, with the livestock ship MV Bahija. It's back in port after this fruitless two-week round trip to the Middle East. Huge doubts seem to surround what happens next. What do you understand to be the fate of the sheep on board?
Thanks, Greg. Yes, I mean, unfortunately, once again, through the live sheep export trade, we've got a crisis. We've got 14,000 sheep on a vessel that has returned to Western Australia and arrived here in what will become heatwave conditions in the next few days. And it's not really clear what will occur, but it is clear that the welfare of those sheep has been put at significant risk, and they're likely to have experienced suffering already, and that's been part and parcel of the live sheep trade for a considerable period of time. It's one of the reasons we have to make the transition out of what is now a marginal trade, but one that has always involved unacceptable animal welfare outcomes.
Well, the conditions, as you say, will have been to some degree stressful so far. Is there any reason to think the number of deaths tragically would be large or large enough to be reportable to federal authorities, or are we not there yet?
Well, we don't have that information. That should be provided by the exporter, by the veterinarians on board, and I'm sure that the independent regulator will be having a look at the conditions on board and the circumstances for the 14,000 sheep. But let's just remember that when it comes to the assessment of animal welfare, it's not about mortality alone. We've changed that. We now assess animal welfare on the basis of heat stress. It's not good enough, and the Australian community won't accept sheep going from Australia and getting to the other end technically alive, having undergone intolerable heat stress. Unfortunately, that is part and parcel of this trade, even outside the moratorium period. But in this case, a voyage that was supposed to be 15 days is now 24 days long. The sheep are still on board. Often ventilation for the sheep requires the movement of the ship. Now that won't occur while it's moored out in Gage Roads, and presumably if it comes into port. And then there's the very difficult question of what will happen next. From my point of view, and I think the point of view of the broader community, that the animal welfare has to be the highest priority.
OK, I will move to the longer-term future of the live sheep trade, which I know is something we've discussed before and you're very invested in. But just on the final matter you raised there are strict quarantine arrangements, and it's fairly unusual to do a round trip and for this livestock to be returned to Australia. So as things stand, quarantine conditions prevent those animals being removed from the ship. What do you say? What exemptions do you say should kick in because of these unique circumstances?
Well, there are biosecurity concerns, and they're legitimate. I mean, the well-being of the broader Western Australian agricultural sector is really, really critical. But I just take issue with part of your characterisation there. I mean, it's not unique. These instances happen from time to time with this trade. And this is not the first time that ships haven't been able to reach their destination. It's certainly not the first time that we've seen an animal welfare crisis out of the live sheep trade. And really it goes to the core point, which is that sheep shouldn't be long-distance freight to one of the hottest and most unstable parts of the world. It's not like transporting fridges or containers of bagged rice or other kinds of goods. As soon as there is an issue, and these issues have arisen from time to time, the welfare of thousands and thousands of animals gets put in very, very serious jeopardy, and that's why the trade has involved a conveyor belt, really, of atrocities over time. Now we have another crisis which is very, very difficult to manage.
Have you made representations to Murray Watt or other relevant ministers about this particular caseload on the Bahija?
I've been in touch with the Minister's office, and of course the Minister and the Department will be working to address the crisis that's arisen. But people should remember that while we want the Department of Agriculture and the relevant regulators to do what they need to do, it is ultimately the responsibility of the export industry. And in the past we've seen circumstances where these kind of events haven't involved the appropriate contingency planning. And then ultimately it's the animals that suffer. And we've got to balance here the welfare of the sheep, which is absolutely critical, with the biosecurity concerns that are also very, very important. But really the suffering is being borne by the sheep. The responsibility for that and for the outcome going forward has to be the exporter themselves and the broader industry, frankly.
Yeah, I will move to that broader question, but just a last one, I suppose, on the particularities or peculiarities of this particular journey that didn't reach its destination. It's hardly the industry's fault that Houthi rebels are firing missiles on ships in the Red Sea. What sort of assessments are undertaken about the passage risks from a security point of view, no matter the cargo, before these ships would leave Australian ports?
Well, that's a question that really should be put to the exporter and to the industries about how they judge these risks. And you're right to say that the conduct of the Houthis is not something that the industry is responsible for, but the fact that these things have happened from time to time in that part of the world is something that the industry should have foreseen. And the circumstances that have applied in the last couple of weeks didn't start 2 weeks ago. They have been brewing in the Red Sea for some period of time. And as I said earlier, this is not the first time. You know, the exporters cannot look at these circumstances and say, oh my God, this is just an unbelievable freak circumstance. Transporting live animals to the hottest part of the world and to a part of the world that has experienced frequent instability for decades involves these risks year in, year out.
All right, now, because I've been promising it, the longer-term future of the live sheep trade, it is to be wound up under Albanese government policy. It has an expert review in its hands now that will guide the timeline towards the cessation of that trade. When do you say that should now happen in light of this and other circumstances?
Well, the Minister's moved along according to a very sensible and timely process to date. Minister Watt was over in Western Australia within the first 4 or 5 weeks of the election of the government to begin that process of consultation, and he's been back over here several times. He then set up the independent panel. He now has that report, and I'd expect that he'll make a response to the report in due course that will detail the plan and the timetable for the final transition. People should just hold on to the fact that it is now a marginal and almost dead trade. It has declined by more than 92% off its peak, and that has occurred without a change in the size of the Western Australian sheep flock and without significant job losses or impacts on farm profitability in Western Australia. It is almost over, and it's the responsible thing for our government to help manage out the last part of that transition for a trade that even now represents less than 1% of Western Australian agricultural output and less than 0.1% of Australian agricultural output.
Yeah, we'll track through those processes that are still ongoing with Minister Watt and others in the government. Josh Wilson, as we said at the beginning, I know it's a warm day there. Appreciate your patience with us and see you back in Canberra before too long.
Thanks, Greg. See you soon.
One by one, we're pleased to